So it is great to see you back. How was your break? Good, good. Well, how was your break? Yeah, well, I thought so. Well, I got a couple things to remind you of as we begin this new semester. Number one, if you have signed up for the chapel class, be sure you check into the classroom, especially in these first 3 weeks, to let us know that you are participating in the class. If you have not signed up for the chapel class but would like to be in it, you need to contact your SSA just as soon as possible by the 21st of January. So if you would check in with them to make sure that you're in the chapel class, that would be super. Secondly, we have some new chapel security measures going in. Maybe you experienced that at the front door. We just want to be sure that we are safe and secure on the campus here, so thank you for being a little bit more patient with us this morning as we were implementing some of those new safety precautions as we gather here to worship the Lord every Monday morning. We have a great list of speakers this semester. Next week will be Ricardo Stewart from the Tempe Redemption Campus. Ricardo is a wonderful speaker. He's never been to campus to speak in chapel. I think you'll really enjoy him. That's next Monday right here in the arena. This morning is our president, Brian Mueller. Give him a warm welcome, would you please?
Thank you and welcome back. Let's hear it for the seniors for whom this is their last semester. And those of you that have the good fortune of coming back next year, I remember second semester of last year we had some controversy around people wanting Papago-style apartment housing and there not being enough Papago-style housing. Do you remember that? Well, I wanted to show you what's being built there. There'll be 3 new dorms next year, which will all be Papago-style, apartment style. Students have their own bedroom, 2,000 new beds. So sign up early. Some other stuff that is coming, there's a new classroom building. It's 170,000 square feet that's being built. There's also a soccer stadium that's being built. Hope that we can have Tuesday night chapels there. And a parking garage. I knew that you wanted your own bedroom, but I knew you wanted parking more than your own bedroom. I'm glad that the chapel band started with the song they started with today because I want to talk about impossible things. I want to talk about impossible things that we can do and should be doing right here or that we're in the midst of doing. But I want to start with a video. I heard this on my way back from northern Arizona a couple weeks ago, and it really impacted me. It's about a guy named Ernie Johnson. Many of you probably don't know him. Some of you may. He's a broadcaster for TNT. He does sports broadcasting. He has a show on the NBA TV that's really exploded and taken off. I heard him speak at a Fellowship for Christian Athletes gathering. Him and his wife are strong believers. And I'd like you to, I took just 5 minutes out of this excerpt because I really wanted you to see this. I think it's one of the most powerful things I've heard in a long time. So if you could play this tape, please.
Ernie Johnson has been in this chair for 26 years. But his is a story of fathers and sons.
There's nothing better a dad can do than bless his son. And there's nothing better than to have a dad tell his son he's proud of him. There's nothing better. It's all part of my story.
This is 2020. Tonight.
Then came 1990 and an episode of ABC's 2020.
After revolution toppled Romania's government last December, the world learned that 14,000 babies were wards of the state.
And the story about the Romanian orphanages came on, and I cried.
And she said, we need to get one of these kids out of an orphanage in Romania. I said, oh, yeah. And her expression didn't change. I said, you're serious?
We were going for a girl between 3 and 12 months with no permanent handicaps. I called Ernie up after 4 days and I said, I've seen this child.
She described him. It's this boy who's almost 3 who can't speak, has a foot that's all turned in, and has all these developmental delays.
He's everything we said we could not accept, but I don't know how I'm going to live my life and wonder what happens to him.
And sometimes you can hear, you know somebody so well that it's like we were sitting here just like this. And I said, bring him home.
They told us Michael will never talk, he will never bond with people, and he will never walk.
That's when you say, look, there's value in everybody. You don't all have to play by the same rules and have the same capabilities.
But at home, Michael's condition was deteriorating. He'd been diagnosed with Duchenne muscular dystrophy. A genetic disorder, Duchenne gradually destroys the body's muscles. It's incurable and ultimately fatal.
When you watch him go from not being able to walk and then to falling down and breaking stuff and breaking an arm and breaking a hip, and now he's in a wheelchair, and then you get to the point where he can't move his hand enough to drive his wheelchair, it has its days where it's very tough.
Ernie was in Milwaukee to call a baseball game.
The Sunday morning of the game, my phone rings before I usually get up really early to finish working on my notes, and it's my wife, and she's in tears. We had taken Michael to the hospital the day before because he had pneumonia. They were having to paddle him because he was unresponsive in the morning.
And I said, well, do whatever you can because his father's not here.
The doctors were able to revive Michael, but to keep him alive, a breathing tube was inserted into his trachea. He was placed on a ventilator.
And I immediately fly home and walk into the hospital that Sunday afternoon, and he's got all this stuff. And I'm like...
And because it was such a traumatic event, they came in and said, we think he's probably going to remain on this ventilator.
Michael never came off the ventilator. Instead, the ventilator came home with Michael.
I love you so much. And here we are, better than 3 years after. And there he is, doing his thing. How's that? Is that good? Toughest guy I know. Such.
Michael is now 27 years old. At all times, he needs to be attached to his ventilator.
We're buds. We spend a lot of time together. The good thing about my schedule is that I don't have to be downtown every day.
Hey, Daddy.
Hey, pal.
Dad love you too.
Love you too.
Dad's happy.
I am ecstatic. I'm his dad, obviously. I'm his buddy. We just like to do stuff together.
Sorry, Daddy.
What?
I love you so much.
I love you so much. You are a whack job. You are.
Today is a big day.
Michael lives for the car show every year. He loves it. He'll get that high-pitched, Daddy, as soon as the first car show commercial comes on.
On hook for 2 seconds, okay? Ready? 2, 3. Good. You're the greatest, man.
You're the greatest man.
You are.
You.
It's just guys hanging out today, right?
Okay, I hear you.
Yeah. He is perfectly and wonderfully made. That one smells real new.
That smell well new.
Look, sometimes our expectations get so high and our desires get so high for the next this or the next that.
So go, Daddy's.
Yeah.
So go, Daddy's car, yeah.
He's whole. He's got to figure it out.
I'm so glad. Yes.
Where the beloved son is now the proud father.
Sometimes you get that little wink that said, you did good on that one. What are you thankful for, Pam?
Look at a great day. A wonderful day. Mommy. Grandma and Grandpa and Nancy and Michael.
You learn from your dad, Will, and you pass that on to your kid. Now let's keep that going.
Yeah, that's, if you have a chance, go watch the entire video. You can get it online. There's more to it than just that, but I thought it was really interesting because you've got, on the one hand, you've got Ernie Johnson, who was born into this fantastic family. He had a great dad and a great mom, great family. His mom and dad were married for 60 years. He bonded with his dad over baseball and over broadcasting. He followed in his dad's footsteps. You've got this person who was born into this fantastic setting and had so much opportunity in life as a result of it. He was really what I call an insider. Then you got Michael on the other side of the world. Michael's parents don't even want him. They drop him off at the park when he's 3 years old. Can't walk, can't talk, got terrible digestive problems. They just dumped him in a park. The state put him in an orphanage. Ernie and his wife decided to adopt him. They knew he was 3 years old, not being able to walk, talk, or bond with people. And then they brought him back to America, and they had him, put him with some doctors, and the doctors said the same thing. He'll never walk, he'll never talk, and he'll never bond with people. He has a severe case of autism, and he would bang his head against his crib to self-stimulate. And then you see the end of that video, and you see somebody with all of these problems who his dad said is fearfully and wonderfully made, and the bond that existed between the dad and the son, and between the son and the rest of the family. And you think about, the words that we sang just a few minutes ago, that nothing is impossible. Do we really believe that? That's an example of how powerful God is if we just take him at his word and if we believe him. I was thinking about this, and I knew that we had to do something serious with regards to our campus to keep working on security, and so thank you for being patient. There's a whole bunch more things coming. The world is so different today. There's so much hostility, religions and countries and races, and we don't seem to be able to get along. And what's the answer to all that? And how is it going to be better when you're adults? Or how are you going to how are you going to work to make it better? It seems impossible, but it's really not. It's really not impossible. If the church really is what the church was supposed to be, it's not impossible. We just got through with Christmas, and most of you spent a lot of time in church or at home, and Luke tells the story of Christmas, the incarnation, in the first chapter and a half. We can almost recite that by heart, most of us, and it's a wonderful story, the most important story in the history of the world. But what comes after that, in Luke's chapter 2, about the middle, all the way to chapter 10, is the most interesting thing to me, because Jesus he's not just born into the world and telling us that we can do impossible things. He lays it out for us. He tells us how to do it. If I would give any recommendation to the church in America today, it's spend a lot of time reading Luke 2 through Luke 10, because it's not just you can do impossible things. He lays it out. In Luke 2:49, we have a little bit of Jesus when he was a kid. You remember the Passover trip that they took, and he got lost, and his parents couldn't find him, and they went back to Jerusalem to find him. And in Luke 2:49, he says, "Didn't you know I had to be in my Father's house?" Luke is an outsider. He's the only Gentile to write a book of the New Testament. He was not on the inside. He was not part of the Jewish race. He sees things as an outsider. And so he goes at it that way. The first thing he says is, didn't you know I had to be in my Father's house? He starts this imagery of fathers and sons. And then in Luke 3:22, Jesus is baptized. And at the end of the baptism, God says, "You are my son, whom I love. With you I am well pleased." The story of the world is a story about a father and a son. That's the story of the world. A father who created the world, a world that rejected the father, and a father who doesn't see any limits. He broke back into the world and said, "We're going to do something impossible here. You and me, father and son, we're going to redeem the world." You think about the relationship that Ernie had with Michael, and you think about the relationship God has with Jesus, and then we keep going. In Luke chapters 4 through 6, Jesus doesn't teach yet. And Luke just goes, Jesus goes out into the world, and he looks for people with real needs. And he casts out demons. He heals Peter's mother-in-law. He heals a man with leprosy. He heals a paralyzed man. He eats with sinners, outsiders, people that have been rejected. And then he heals a man's hand. He goes out into the world and he identifies people with real needs and he serves those people. And then when people have had a chance to observe all that, he says, "Now let me sit down and do some teaching." But not before people have had a chance to observe the kingdom and what it means to be part of God's kingdom. And so Luke chapter 6 now, he sits down and he starts to teach. And I'm going to just take a part of that. Luke chapter 6, verse 27 to 35. "But I tell you who hear me, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who mistreat you. If someone strikes you on one cheek, turn to him the other also. If someone takes your cloak, do not stop him from taking your tunic. Give to everyone who asks you, and if anyone takes what belongs to you, do not demand it back. Do to others as you would have them do to you. If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who are good to you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners do that. And if you lend to those from whom you expect repayment, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners expecting to be repaid in full. But love your enemies, do good to them, and lend to them without expecting to get anything back. Then your reward will be great, and you will be sons of the Most High, because he is kind to ungrateful and wicked. Be merciful just as your Father is merciful. He's laying out an approach to the world that is so counterintuitive. And he's laying it out after he's gone out and demonstrated how to do exactly what he's talking about. But then Luke follows it up with these interesting stories. The very next story, the very next miracle, is Jesus healing a Roman officer's servant. Now, just because he healed, the healing of the servant is not the most important thing. The Jews hated the Romans. The Romans occupied their country. The Romans were the oppressors. And just after laying out this message, Jesus goes out, encounters this Roman soldier who needs his servant healed, and Jesus takes the time to do it. So he's following up what he's saying, and he's executing it. It's interesting how Luke sees things. As a Gentile, as an outsider, he sees so clearly the message of Jesus, which is just not to the insiders, it's primarily to the outsiders. It's primarily to those people who have huge needs, who've been rejected. I think about that, and I think about, again, the relationship between Ernie and his son Michael. And then in Luke 7, John the Baptist is in prison, and he wants to know, is Jesus the real Messiah? And so he tells his followers, go ask him. And here's Jesus' response in Luke 7. Go back and report to John what you have heard and seen. The blind receive sight, the lame walk, Those who have leprosy are cured, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the good news is proclaimed to the poor. If those things are happening, the kingdom is here. If those things are happening, I'm the one. And then he follows it up again with probably the most well-known story in the Bible, even to unbelievers. And in this context, it's so powerful. Story of the Good Samaritan. A guy's traveling from Jerusalem to Jericho, and robbers come on, they steal his stuff, they beat him, he's near death, laying on the side of the road. An insider, a Levite, passes by, walks to the other side of the road. A priest passes by, walks to the other side of the road. Those are insiders not willing to help an insider. A Samaritan walks by. The Samaritans hated the Jews. The Jews hated the Samaritans. When the Jews went into captivity, the Jews that were remaining in Samaria intermarried. And so they were no longer a pure race. And so the Jews looked down on them, they condescended, and the Samaritans hated them in return. But so you have this Samaritan who puts his life at his own risk to help somebody on the outside. He was going to get no return on that. He was helping the enemy. It's such a powerful story when you put it in the context that Luke saw it in. See, sometimes I think we overcomplicate Christianity. Intellectually, we overcomplicate it. It really comes down to two things. Love God with your whole heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. But what we've not gotten right in the world is that our neighbor includes those people that we disagree with. It even includes our enemies. That's where the power is. People look at us as Christians, and when we gather in our churches and we help each other inside the church, that's a good thing, and we should do that. But the real power of the gospel is when Christians really live it out differently than it's getting lived out in the rest of the world, because we take the time to understand our enemies and those people that we disagree with. It's when we do that, expecting no return, that there's power in the message, the power to do impossible things. I just love it that the doctor said, this child will never walk, he'll never talk, and he'll never bond with people. See, from a scientific perspective, that was impossible. He had a severe case of autism. These doctors see these kids all the time. He's already 3 years old. They take him out of the orphanage, they bring him to America, they put him in the middle of this Christ-loving family who's doing something for a perfect stranger. And the power is overwhelming. He walks, he talks, until he gets this next challenge, which is impossible to overcome. And he's almost dead, and he's on a ventilator. But you could see that, don't let him die, keep him alive, his father's not here. Just to think for a second that God, the Father, thinks about every one of us that way. That love and that bond that existed between that father and that son that was depicted in that video, God thinks of all of us like that. If we can get enough of God and enough of Jesus into us that we can think of even those people that are our enemies and disagree with us that same way, we can do the impossible. We can change the world. I know that a lot of you are helping, and I really, really appreciate it. But what happens, in neighborhoods like this is that a business moves out and the tax base erodes, and another business moves out and the tax base erodes, and another business moves out and the tax base erodes. And then pretty soon what happens is there's no money, and the city cuts back services, and there's no parks, and there's no golf courses, and there's no pools, and the public schools suffer, and nobody wants to live there. And then what happens is that the gangs move in, and they bring in prostitution, and they bring in drugs, and criminal activity invades the whole place, and the only place that live there are the people that have lived there for 35 years, or they have to live there. And that goes on with momentum like that until somebody puts a stake in the ground and says, we are called to those places in the world where there is real need. That's why 5 years ago, when we made a decision to invest $600 million into this campus, we said, would you really want to invest $600 million at 35th Avenue and Camelback? But the answer has become obvious. The answer has become so obvious. This is not me. This is not us. God is doing something powerful here. Ernie, you could feel it. He was so blessed in his life. A great wife, 2 kids, great extended family. His career's taking off. What do people do when their careers take off like that? They don't bring this burden on unless they've got a different reason for living. Ernie brings on this burden into his life that's really, really time-consuming because he's looking out there for people who he knows he's been blessed, and so his job is to bless other people. What's happening at Grand Canyon right now is that we've been blessed. We've been blessed with overwhelming blessings. And it's not me and it's not us, it's God that's doing it. And what's his expectation? That now we're going to reach out. And we're going to bless the neighborhood that we live in unimaginable, impossible ways. Down at the police force, they're saying, that there's a miracle going on at 35th Avenue and Camelback. Major crime categories are down 30%. Major crime categories are down 30%. This used to be the worst crime area in the state of Arizona. Housing values are up 30% in our neighborhood. Housing values are up 30%. Those of you that are helping with the Habitat program, you're helping raise the values of all the properties in the neighborhood. We had a D-minus failing high school in Alhambra High School 2 years ago that's now 9 points away from being a B-rated high school, and the student leaders at that high school, who most of them come from an inner-city neighborhood that are living below the poverty line, believe that they will be a part of a high school that will be an A-rated high school. I want you to imagine what would happen if every school in this neighborhood was an A-rated school, if the housing values kept going up by 30%, if the crime rates kept going down by 30%, this would be a prosperous place again. You could be a big part of that. I can't think of a thing that I'm more excited about than for us as a university to understand that the blessings that we've got because God's doing a great work here. He put us here for the reason of now showing to the world that the people that live outside our walls are people that have great needs. And we've been put here for a reason. We've been put here to bring prosperity to them, just like God has brought prosperity to us. One of the things that I hope is that 10 years from now, many of you will have graduated from here. You'll have jobs and you'll have careers, and you'll drive back here with your husband or wife and with your children, and you'll say, you know what? There was a time when this neighborhood was different than it is now, and I was part of God's great work. It's loving people that we don't even know. It's loving people who are on the outside. It's loving people who maybe we even disagree with. In the Learning Lounge, what I tell Joe to tell the students is, when the students from Alhambra come across the street and they need help, don't ask them if they're Christians. Don't ask them if they're believers. Just help them. Just help them. When we go out into the neighborhood looking for homes that want to participate in the Habitat Project, what I say is, don't ask to see their Bible. Don't ask them if they've been to church. Just help them. Because when you keep helping people that have needs, eventually they're going to ask the question, what's the source of your motivation? You just spent 8 hours fixing up my home, and I'm a perfect stranger. You have no idea who I am. That's Christianity. That's the power of Christ. When we talk about doing impossible things, those things create impossible change. Pray with me, please. Father, we really thank you that you look at all of us. as your sons and daughters. In the same way that Ernie looked at Michael as his son and how precious that relationship was, you look at us the same way. We live in a time where there is great hostility. We live at a time when we can't be naive because there is evil in the world and we must protect ourselves from evil. But by the same token, if there's going to be transformation, it's only you that can do it. It's only you that can do it. I think it's probably the hardest thing in the world to love people that don't like you, to love people who purposely want to do you harm. But that's where the power is. That's where the power to do the impossible is. Help us to embrace that. Give us the strength. Give us the faith to embrace that. We know this is not us. We know it's you. And we just want to be tools that you use to bring transformation to people that really need it. In Jesus' name we ask all of this. Amen. Welcome back. This is going to be the greatest semester we have ever had at Grand Canyon University. Welcome back, and I wish you all a great semester.